Hello all. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on Cutting the Green Tape, Regulatory Strategies to Advance Restoration. We're going to give a minute or so for folks to join this webinar before we get started, but so excited to see some of the numbers jumping up on the screen and all of you joining us today to have this conversation. For those of you that I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Meghan Hertel. I'm Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat with California Natural Resources Agency, and we will get started with this webinar a minute or two after the hour. Gold star to those of you who are joining directly on time. I'm still seeing numbers of folks joining on to this webinar. If you're here for the Cutting the Green Tape, Regulatory Strategies to Advance Restoration, webinar 2 in our series of webinars, really excited to have you here. And we're just going to give another moment or so for folks to continue to join. While we're doing that, I will remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and that you will be able to view these webinars later on our 30 by 30 website. And that will encourage you throughout this webinar to put your questions in the Q&A so that our expert panelists can help answer those during the discussion or at the end when we have some moderated discussion with the full group. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're about a minute after. I know some folks are still joining this webinar, but we've got a lot of incredible content that we want to cover today, and so I don't want to delay too much longer. Again, for those of you who just joined, my name is Meghan Hertel. I'm Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat at the California Natural Resources Agency. We are one of the state agencies that work on the Cutting the Green Tape initiative, and this is really an effort to increase the pace and scale of environmental restoration and environmental uplift by making our permit structures smoother, faster, and streamlined. And we've got an incredible set of presenters today who are going to walk you through their experiences using state streamlining efforts, bundling them together to be able to get activities and projects done on the ground. This is a webinar that is being recorded, so you have all been muted and your cameras are off, but you can put your questions into the Q&A piece at the bottom of your screen throughout this presentation, and our presenters will either answer there or work it into the live discussion. We also have a chat function. Please know, though, that for our panelists to answer your questions, they will need to be in the Q&A box, so encourage you to use that. Also, a big thank you to all of you out there. This is a technical webinar about permit streamlining, which means that those folks that are signing on are likely doing environmental restoration and looking to learn more about how to use these streamlining efforts. We know that environmental regulations are incredibly important. They have provided us with clean air, clean water, and helped reverse the really alarming trends of species and habitat loss that we have seen in many places across the state. But we also know that we can do them faster. And we need to have these permits move quicker so that we can do environmental restoration better, more effectively, and more efficiently. And we have a suite of tools that work. And you're going to hear today from some folks who are employing them on the ground. So just a reminder, this is part of a series of technical webinars. And so we encourage you to go back and watch the previous ones if you haven't had a chance to see them yet. Stay tuned in for this one and then catch our next one, which will be coming up on May 21st. So with that, I'd actually like to invite Kellyx Nelson onto the screen with me. Kellyx today is going to be our moderator of this session. And Kellyx, I think probably everybody in this community knows you very well. You likely need no introduction, but I'm going to pass it over to you both to introduce yourself and to kick us off. Thanks everybody for joining today.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Yes, my name is Kellyx Nelson. That was a great intro in reminding us why we need cutting green tape. It's nice to see so many people joining us today. My day job is as the Executive Director of the Resource Conservation District, or RCD, in San Mateo County. And I also serve on the steering committee of the California Landscape Stewardship Network, which partnered with the Resources Agency and Cali, PA, to help advance some of these tools that we're going to be talking about. So I'm very happy and honored to be here and to bring onto the screen at some point some folks who are doing some great work. As the Deputy Secretary mentioned, this webinar is part of a series of sort of deeper dives into specific tools, some new, some less new, for efficient regulatory compliance to advance restoration. In our last webinar, we focused on CEQA pathways, the categorical exemption for small-scale habitat restoration projects, the new statutory exemption for restoration projects through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the programmatic EIR for CEQA compliance when using the State Water Board's new State Restoration General Order. If you didn't know about that or hadn't seen that yet, we'll be sure to let you know where you can find the recording of that and learn more about how people can use those tools. And then today, the purpose of today's webinar is to get information about specific permitting pathways, not CEQA, but the permitting pathways that people are using. We'll be hearing from Erica Lovejoy with Sustainable Conservation, an organization I think we all know and love, to provide an overview of some key permits and associated resources and tools. And then from a handful of practitioners who are going to walk us through the bundle of permits and the strategies that they used for permitting their very specific restoration projects that are probably going to have some things in common with some of the restoration projects many of you are advancing. There's going to be abundant time for Q&A, and we will wrap up at 1 p.m. So without further ado, I'd love to bring Erica on the screen to give some overview of some of the permits to advance restoration.
All right, thanks so much, Kellyx. Let me just turn on my presentation here. All right, there we go. Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Lovejoy with Sustainable Conservation, and we have been working with the agencies and other partners on efficient permitting pathways to help you get more restoration projects done. And as Kellyx mentioned, we got a lot of new tools. So I want to give you a very quick overview of the different pathways and how they can be bundled. And this is going to help set the stage for the upcoming speakers who are going to talk about how they have used these tools in the real world. And much of what we'll talk about are programmatic permits, which are permits, which are pre-written permits that apply to specific project types. They have a preset menu of conditions. Many of these conditions have been coordinated between multiple agencies to increase consistency and to make it easier for you to meet agency expectations. And this upfront work is definitely going to save you time and resources and help you get your projects permitted more quickly. And so this is a very high-level overview. I'll give you more information in a moment where you can learn more. So starting on the left in the green box, we've got the ultimate combination for small scale projects, 5 acres or less. We got the Water Board's small habitat restoration permit, that CEQA categorical exemption for small scale projects, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Act as well. And so these create a very efficient, coordinated process that can help you get coverage from the Department of Fish and Wildlife in just 30 to 60 days after you submit your application. In the center column, we've got permits that work for projects of any size, and they can be bundled with those small project tools that I just mentioned to you. So if you're working, for example, around anadromous fish or in coastal areas, the NOAA Restoration Center has a programmatic biological opinion, or 3 programmatic biological opinions, or PBOs. And they've covered over 300 projects around the state with these very efficient tools. And the NOAA also has a consistency determination with the California Coastal Commission. And what that means is if your project meets certain criteria, you do not need a separate coastal development permit. And that is a big time and money saver. And of course, everybody loves working with the folks at NOAA RC. Now, below NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a new-ish statewide restoration programmatic biological opinion for federally listed species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It's very broad, and it covers many, if not most, of the species you are likely to encounter in aquatic restoration projects. Now at the bottom, we've got the Army Corps regional general permits and nationwide permits. And of course, the Corps has been using programmatic permits for decades, but I wanted to point out their new Sacramento District regional general permit, which has especially broad coverage for aquatic habitat projects. Now, in the last column, these are tools that are mostly used for larger projects over 5 acres, but they can be bundled with the permits in the center column. So at the top, we've got the state and regional water boards, Restoration General Order, or they call it the SERGO. And this is designed for projects that are beyond the scope of their small habitat restoration permit. They have a CEQA Programmatic Environmental Impact Report, or SERGO, that pairs with it. And this CEQA document can also be used to cover some individual projects. And so take note of this because it can really save a lot of time and money, especially if your project is ineligible for the next CEQA pathway, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife statutory exemption for restoration, or they call it the SERP. And the SERP is a really great CEQA tool for those projects that qualify, but not all projects fit. So definitely think about the SERGO as an alternative, especially if you have a multi-benefit project. And last but not least, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has 2 other really strong tools for larger projects. First, they have their restoration consistency determinations, and those are and these are for species that are listed at both under both the state and federal Endangered Species Act. And this CD process is very fast for CEQA coverage, and then it works together with those federal biological opinions that I just mentioned. Also, the department has the recently expanded restoration management permit, and this revamped permit can now cover all of the necessary CDFW authorizations in one single permit. Very efficient. You want to check that out. So for more information on all of these tools, please check out our technical assistance website, acceleratingrestoration.org. We've got an online tool there that can help you select from the different protection measures that are required in many of these permits. You can sign up for our newsletter, or you can contact us for a free permitting consult on these tools. So that's it for me. Thanks so much. Back to you, Kellyx.
Thanks, Erica. The way you said that, I feel like we're on the news. I would love to build on that. You gave a great overview for folks, and I know we'll put some links and resources in the chat. And I wanted to bring what we're calling our lightning round panelists on. If you would, Peter Vanderberg from the Nature Conservancy, Jim Robbins with San Mateo RCD and Elnis Ecological, April Zahn with Ducks Unlimited, and Mo Gomez with South Coast Habitat Restoration. If you could all come on screen now. And we are going to, just for folks who are joining us, we've asked each of them to tell us 3 things. Tell us about a project that they did, some permits that they want to highlight in their permitting strategy, permits that they used, and any key takeaways from these different projects. And I believe, Mo, you are first on deck.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Kellyx. Good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to this webinar here and sharing information about a project that we were involved with recently. Again, my name is Mo Gomez. I'm the director of a small nonprofit based in Santa Barbara County. We're called South Coast Habitat Restoration. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a project called the Santa Anita Creek Fish Passage Project. You see on the photos here on your screen, 3 photographs of a barrier on the Gaviota coast, which was blocking steelhead trout migration. In 2023, this decades-old barrier got impacted as a result of the January 2023 atmospheric river, and there was imminent road failure at this site. We were very concerned working with the landowner that this may turn into a very difficult situation, and we worked very quickly, and I'll explain how, to replace that structure with a clear spanning bridge, along with removing the barrier to steelhead migration and restoring the stream channel. The project was funded by the landowner as well as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Prop 68 funding. Next slide. So here's the complete list of permits. As I'm going over these, you can see on the right-hand side some of the images of the barrier coming out from the same vantage point, with the new bridge being installed at this location. So for CEQA, we ended up getting categorical exemption 15333 filed by CDFW for the project, and that was part of the HREA 1652 application for the project. I did mention this was an emergency project, and working with the Army Corps of Engineers, we applied to RGP 63 coverage, and as part of that received consultation and minimization measures and protections from National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The Water Board provided a notice of applicability under their 401 cert for RGP 63, and then we ended up getting permits from the County of Santa Barbara, which included an emergency permit to authorize the work, along with a follow-up CDP and the grading and building permits. Now, during the CDP process, we were also required to do a follow-up notice of exemption for CEQA, even though the Department of Fish and Wildlife had done categorical exemption 15333. That information was provided to the county, and they still wanted to do their own. So that was an interesting process that we had to go through. But all in all, the permitting worked out pretty efficiently, and we were able to get a project from concept to implementation in less than 1 calendar year, which is the quickest project we've ever done in my career in this region. Next slide. So some key takeaways. California Department of Fish and Wildlife's HREA application allows for an efficient permitting process. It's a must to have a complete submittal package for processing. There are a number of tools that you need to have, reports that you need to have as part of that process. So it's important to have all that information prepared and packaged so that that can go very smoothly. Army Corps' RGP 63 provided timely coverage and species consultation for the project. We had a number of red-legged frogs at that project site. We were able to move those critters out of the project area and didn't lose any species as part of the project. It's important to engage local jurisdictions early so CEQA doesn't have to happen twice. So I encourage those working with local agencies to try to preemptively have conversations about what might be helpful for them and make things efficient for everybody. And again, as I mentioned, this was an important project for us. We were able to remove a barrier to steelhead trout migration, and we were able to complete it in less than 1 year from concept to implementation. And very exciting that this could be a pathway to try to make more efficient the efficiencies in improving habitat for steelhead trout in this region. Thank you. Back to you, Kellyx.
Thank you, Mo. Yeah, that's great being able to complete that within 1 year. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions from people about that. We're going to go straight to the next person that's in our lineup, which is Peter. So Peter, if you don't mind coming on screen. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kellyx. Hey, everybody. I'm Peter Vanderberg. I am the North Coast Restoration Project Manager for the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to highlight a project that we constructed last summer on the lower South Fork 10-Mile River. This is in Mendocino County, just north of Fort Bragg. The project's focus was to create habitat for coho salmon by reconnecting floodplains and constructing really big in-stream wood structures. We started working in 2023 with our consultant, PCI Ecological, to design and permit the project with a grant from CDFW. And then we built it last summer with funding from NOAA and the State Coastal Conservancy. So we went from concept to construction in about 1.5 years, and it's been really cool to see the benefits of the project materialize so quickly. We've had a really wet winter up here on the North Coast, and the floodplain features that we constructed have been consistently inundated with slow-moving water, providing great habitat for juvenile coho. And we've also seen a ton of other wildlife using the site. The game cam images here are from literally days and weeks after we finished construction. And that was really gratifying to see. You know, the excavators rolled out and the wildlife wasted no time moving in. So for permits, and if we could go to the next slide, the total disturbance area for this project was just under 5 acres, but it was nearly 1,000 linear feet of stream. We had a variety of sensitive species in the area, including salmonids, but also notably tidewater goby. So we worked with our agency partners early to identify an efficient permitting process. And it then ended up being an interesting mix of things that are designed for small projects and then other ones that are designed for large projects. So for CEQA compliance, we use the old categorical exemption for small habitat restoration. That exemption, as Erica said, has a 5-acre limit, but no limit on linear feet, so we fit. But HREA permits have that 500-foot limit. So we were way over that. So we had to use the SERGO for water board permitting, and then got a standard lake and stream bed alteration agreement from CDFW. And for take permitting, we used the Programmatic Biological Opinions from both NOAA and Fish and Wildlife Service on the federal side, and then received a restoration consistency determination from CDFW. These permits from those 3 separate agencies worked really well together. And one specific thing that I'll note here is that for a long time, we didn't tackle this project because of the Tidewater gobies. We were honestly kind of scared of the permitting headaches that they might cause. But the Fish and Wildlife Service PBO completely changed that, and it worked great for us. It was really efficient while still being completely protective of this species. Finally, we're in the coastal zone, so we completed a coastal permitting through the NOAA Restoration Center's federal consistency determination. And shout out to that permit. It's just an incredibly indispensable tool. So some quick takeaways from the project, and next slide, please. One is early coordination with agency partners is really important. And I know we always say that, it's almost cliche, but now we have this range of permitting options. And options are great, but they can also be overwhelming. Agency staff can help you navigate that and select which permits from this suddenly pretty big menu are the best for each particular project. And then also, programmatic permits are incredible tools, but they're also by their very nature general. So it's really helpful to work with agencies to zero in on the conditions that you need in order to meet requirements, but that also work for the particulars of your project. For example, for this project, traditional dewatering was not feasible and not really desirable. So we worked with the agencies to identify ways to protect aquatic resources during construction while not having to dewater the entire river. And then zooming out a little bit, this project was the most recent in a series of salmonid restoration projects that we've implemented over time, including 2 that were just upstream of this one. And it's been interesting to see how these projects change as more cutting the green tape tools come online. First, with fewer size constraints, we can now take adaptive management seriously. In this instance, we were able to bundle adaptive management of previous projects that we built in 2018 and 2020 into the permits for this project that we built in 2024. And second, I feel like we always say that cutting the green tape is intended to increase the pace and scale of restoration, but from my perspective, it's also increased the quality of restoration. Our individual projects are just straight up better because of all these new tools. And it used to be that when we would initially approach a project, the first thing in our mind was, what can we design that will fit in this box of 5 acres and 500 feet? Permitting was driving design and the cart was in front of the horse. And there are thousands of miles of degraded river and stream in California, and we're supposed to do what? Restore them 500 feet at a time? But now we're able to think about restoration in a much more ambitious way, and our designs are influenced less by permitting and more by just what's ecologically best for any given site. And that's been a total game changer. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Trying to get on screen. The host and I were battling for control of my camera. Thank you for that, Peter. I think that's very inspiring, and I really appreciate you speaking to quality, being able to do good work as well, and posing that question that you've posed to me before about how are we going to do all of the restoration of California streams if we're doing it 500 feet at a time. So very much appreciate that. I am going to ask April Zahn to come on screen from Ducks Unlimited.
Thanks, Kellyx. I'm April Zahn. I'm the manager of the Environmental Compliance Program for Ducks Unlimited's Western region. And quickly, for those that don't know what Ducks Unlimited is, we are a national nonprofit organization that's focused on wetland conservation and restoration. We've worked for over 85 years in the state of California on a wide variety of projects, including the great one I'm going to highlight today, the Staten Island Wetland Restoration and Carbon Farming Project. So Staten Island's a 9,500 acre island that's owned by the Nature Conservancy and located in the San Joaquin Sacramento River Delta. The vast majority of this large island is currently farmed in wildlife-friendly agriculture and sits anywhere from 9 to 22 feet below mean sea level, which threatens the levee stability and exacerbates the potential for a levee breach. Next slide. So there's 4 primary goals for this particular project. The first is to create habitat for shorebirds, waterfowl, and other wildlife. The project also aims to reduce land subsidence and sequester carbon by accreting biomass in wetted areas. Finally, the Nature Conservancy as a landowner is testing economic incentives for wetland restoration, including the ability to generate revenue through the voluntary carbon market. From a project work perspective, the project includes construction of a series of habitat features, islands, swales, and ponds, as well as water conveyance and access infrastructure. This infrastructure and habitat features are located within several discrete wetland units and rice fields, and they're leveraged to create about 1,000 acres of enhanced habitat. I also wanted to mention the project permits for this particular effort allow for up to 10 years of routine management and maintenance activities, which is important to reduce the potential regulatory burden associated with taking care of this infrastructure over time. Next slide. So this particular project utilized 4 of the streamlined permits we've been talking about. The Delta Conservancy, as a state funding partner for this project, utilized the statutory exemption for restoration projects for our CEQA compliance process. The project was verified by the Army Corps of Engineers under that general permit, Nationwide Permit 27. The project's water quality certification was provided through the statewide restoration general order, which includes a specific category of activities that are a really great fit for the type of wetland restoration work contemplated at Staten Island. And then finally, we utilize the statewide restoration programmatic biological opinion to address the potential effects of this project on giant garter snake. Next slide, please. So similar to other presenters, there are some thematic takeaways I wanted to highlight. First, the suite of permit efficiencies that have been developed for restoration projects are truly a huge benefit to grant-funded projects with relatively constrained timelines and budgets. For example, the schedule efficiencies associated with the CERP process were essential in securing one of the primary state grants for the work at Staten Island. Next, early and frequent coordination with agency permitting staff is a great way to determine the most efficient permit strategy for the unique circumstances of your project. Often, minor deviations in the project design or the construction methodology that you determine in consultation with those agencies can allow you to take advantage of those permit efficiencies to the benefit of both your project schedule and your budget. I also wanted to just mention that restoration proponents should always look for opportunities to tailor the type of baseline data needed to support permit applications. For example, Ducks Unlimited regularly requests permission to develop wetland maps based largely on aerial photo interpretation, where we are confident that projects won't require compensatory mitigation for wetland impacts. This is particularly important for large sites where formal wetland delineations can be cost prohibitive. I wanted to reiterate that early and meaningful coordination and engagement with tribes is important and can significantly improve project outcomes. In addition, there's certain areas in California, including the Delta, where regional coordination is strongly encouraged and critical to project success. For example, in the Delta, you can use the Good Neighbor Checklist, which is an appendix to the Delta Plan, as a tool to understand who may be interested in your work and what resource considerations are unique to your project site. Finally, it's important to consider site-specific trade-offs that may result from restoration work. Trade-offs typically occur if restoration is proposed in an area where the ecosystem has been disrupted and the benefits of returning a site to a pre-disturbed condition will impact species that have benefited from that disrupted state. An example might include the loss of foraging habitat for Swainson's hawk when an agricultural field is returned to wetland habitat, which is a common conversation in the Delta. Thinking about these potential trade-offs early in the process ensures you won't be caught off guard by any unexpected resource considerations. That's all, Kellyx.
Thanks, April. I think that I'm definitely seeing some trends here in talking about early and meaningful engagement. I have a feeling that that's something we're going to want to ask of all of you in a moment. And I think, Jim, that's also something that you're going to be speaking to. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to come on screen, Jim Robbins, and tell us about this backfield project.
I hope I'm on screen. Am I on screen?
You're on screen.
Okay, I can't see myself, but that's perfectly fine. Devin, can you light up the slides for me, please? So I'm going to talk about the Butno Creek Backfill Floodplain and Streamflow Enhancement Project. This project takes place in the town of Pescadero, sort of between San Francisco and Santa Cruz on the coast. I'm going to give you a sort of a pictorial introduction to the project. So Devin, next slide, please. This is the project before the site before the project. We've got about a 14-acre farm field that's pretty marginal agriculture due to poor drainage, flood prone, and extremely drought limited water supply. You can barely see it, but it'll become more obvious as we go through the pictures. But there's a defunct old agricultural pond sort of in the center upper part of the screen adjacent to the field. And there's about an 1,800-foot piece of Butno Creek that is snaking along what is the northern kind of meandering boundary of the farm field. Okay, and the project was in 2 phases, so I'm going to walk through the phases. Next slide, please, Devin, or next photograph. Okay, so what did we do? We worked with this farmer to excavate over 4 acres of regularly inundated floodplain, so really low floodplain. This is floodplain that was designed to inundate for multiple weeks, if not months, every year. We also, and to be incredibly dynamic and ever-changing. With that, we also had about 2 acres of what we were calling our gently sloping transition banks. You can sort of see those between the farm field and the floodplain. So that's already about 6+ acres. That's about 40% of this marginal farmland was returned to floodplain habitat. There's also an additional 800 feet downstream of channel that was enhanced for complexity with a kind of a raft of different low-tech process-based features, living riffles, accelerated recruitment of wood, etc. There's also a floodplain that you can sort of see the beginnings of. There's a 100-acre floodplain just downstream of the site. And this project kind of built on a 2016 project and really increased inundation frequency and duration of that larger 100-acre floodplain. Okay, next slide. This is just after the first winter as the flows are receding. Just notice the multiple channels and all the exciting stuff and the tremendous amount of sediment. Sediment deposition was a huge goal of this project in restoring natural sediment transport processes. So let's go to the next one, please, Devin. All right, now you can probably see the large reservoir. Remember, it's a stream flow enhancement project. So we also built a 16-acre-foot reservoir that's mostly filled with local runoff and a wet season diversion. There's a new appropriative right that goes with this pond and forbearance of in-stream diversion during May to September. There is some flexibility in this. We come up with a really unique flow schedule that has some flexibility in the early part of that forbearance season based on flow. So basically, if there's a ton of water in the stream, we've had a really wet year, there's an ability to top off the reservoir in the early part of that forbearance. Basically, there's 7 acres of farm field that's still in play. That 7 acres has been significantly improved. It's about a foot to a foot, well, it's about a half a foot higher. We use the spoils from the floodplain excavation to build that field up. We've also improved the grading and drainage on that field. And of course, the field is significantly more usable because we've got fantastic water security. Also provided water
Jim,
security.
I just wanted to give you a heads up that you have 2 minutes left.
Yep, I know that. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm good. Also water security for additional 10 acres of irrigated ag. Next. This is just what it looks like now. Next. Tools. We used a lot of the same tools everybody did. We were one of the first to go through SERP. We used the previous version of the RMP to deal with take for both coho salmon and the fully protected San Francisco garter snake. We used Surgo. We used the federal consistency for the coastal development permit and both of the programmatic BOs with NOAA and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So very similar pathways to a lot of our partners. And next one, please. So key lessons learned. I think I pretty much agree with what I heard from everybody else about early and lots of engagement, but I also wanted to highlight SERP as a gateway into the larger set of tools. We found that working with the department staff, and they brought the water board along to sort of go through SERP and really go through the fine details of the project narrative, the avoidance and minimization techniques, etc., really helped us get on the same page regarding tremendous amounts of details. And that really was a perfect sort of entry point into the rest of the CGT permits. We also used integrating the AMMs, the mitigation and the avoidance and minimization measures from Surgo and the BOs directly into our project design and project description. increased certainty for us, but really consistency across all those permit terms. Last two things I'll just mention is I think we really ground truth the fact that CGT tools can be used on multi-benefit projects. This project has tremendous ecosystem benefits, but also benefited the farmer. And CGTs also, some of these permits, because there's some unique flexibility, they are able to accommodate the complexities of dynamic process-based restoration with a little bit more uncertain outcomes. And I think those are really key things for us to think about as we look toward permitting. And that's it. I am done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And if you all could come back on screen, I appreciate this. So we've got, as Jim was just pointing out, like multi-benefit projects, and some of your other projects were multi-benefit, process-based, where there's some unknowable outcomes, you know, inherently uncertain, emergencies, things having to do with public lands, private lands. I mean, I think what we're seeing here is some of these same tools applying to a very wide range of projects with a number of different benefits. We've got a few questions in the Q&A that I'll ask you to answer on screen, but I also just wanted, one thing that came up, I think all of you mentioned to some degree, having early coordination, communication. That's sort of a truism with permitting. What is different about that with these cutting green tape tools? So what about these tools provides a particular pathway for that kind of early coordination?
I'll start. Oh, should we raise hands? Is it that type of formal panel?
No, you go.
You know what? You win, April. Go ahead. Just because you said.
I would say what Peter said resonated with me, right? We have a host of new tools that when they're leveraged together can be really powerful, but if you don't exactly know which one to use, having those conversations early can really make sure you're on the right track.
And I guess I saw a question in the Q&A about when in the process. I think for a lot of practitioners, it's a little worrisome, or you could be a little bit nervous about getting too much input and too much, dialogue early on. But I would suggest people think very clearly about being at a point in your project when you have just enough information, clear goals, clear objectives, clear understanding of the site, but you haven't gone too far. Because really good coordination requires the opportunity to change directions. And if you've already gone too far, it feels like your project's already too far along. So that's sort of the answer I would give to that question.
I just want to let our participants today know that we'll be checking the Q&A function for questions rather than the chat. So if you're putting questions in the chat, go ahead and put them in the Q&A that's at the bottom, and we'll make sure that we get to them in order. I don't know if anybody else had anything to add to that last question. Peter, did you?
Yeah, I'd just say one great thing about a lot of the cutting green tape initiatives is that they've also come with dedicated staff at the agencies for restoration projects. So now there's a lot more availability for us to consult with them. And I think it's really important. We had talked about a lot of these projects are in dynamic systems and they're intended to work with natural processes. And we're not necessarily being super deterministic or prescriptive about outcomes. And that can be difficult to fit into like the rigid lines of permits, and working with agency partners on how you define those outcomes or how you word your permits can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. So was someone else going to say something, Mo?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, to Peter's point about coordinating with the cutting the green tape staff. I'm in Santa Barbara County, and we happen to be lucky enough to have Christian Romberger as part of the cutting green tape team down this way. And it's very helpful to be able to just talk to him about projects. So I encourage all of you all to reach out to your, local staff that you're working with and have dialogue, get ideas going. Sometimes even before a project is going, there could be some good ideas that they have as well.
So if we can just explore for a moment process-based restoration. So one of the things that we know that we need for resilience to climate change and associated stressors is dynamic systems, that resilience inherently involves dynamism, which is inherently unknowable in terms of what the outcome will be. At the same time that regulations and permitting pathways are looking for some certainty in the outcome, so they know what they're permitting. So what about these tools makes it easier to do that? Or what did you do in the process of permitting that made it possible to do that outside of or in addition to the thing that we've already talked about, which is the engagement and, you know, having the communication? Is there anything else specific that's like a pro tip for any of the people here about how to do that? Jim?
Well, I think one very specific thing is a number of the regional boards and the state board have policies regarding impacts to streams and wetlands and related mitigation and planting, but those policies are not directly applicable to both SERGO and SHARP. So they kind of give staff, and staff don't always aren't always clear on this, but they give them, I don't want to use the word an out, but they give them an opportunity to be much more creative. So something we really always, I think, is a struggle with dynamic projects is, well, how much are you going to plant and what are your success criteria? Especially when you're building dynamic floodplains, you plant stuff, you're spending a lot of money for stuff likely to get blown out and other stuff to move in. So being able to use these to help our permit partners understand where there's flexibility, I think that's like a very pointed opportunity to sort of deal with that dynamism and CGT.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to go to the questions that are in the chat. Quick one for you, Mo. How long did the RGP and associated consultations with the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA take from start to finish for your emergency project?
I was off on my other screen reviewing my dates on stuff, and it was about 30 days.
Wow.
Very quick. Very, very quick. Yeah.
A question from Leslie. Does the CDFW's the new RMP include road-related work? And can you bundle multiple sites together? Eric, I wonder if that's something you might want to take a stab at.
I'll take a stab at it with the caveat. I'm going to say a bunch of things, but everybody needs to check with the agency folks to confirm what they're willing to do for you or what they think is appropriate. But the new restoration management permit, the first thing I'll say is it covers both upland and aquatic habitat restoration. So that's an important caveat, not caveat, but eligibility factor. And the department, if there's a restoration project that meets the definitions under the restoration management permit, whether it's roads or some other area, the department may consider covering that, and they often do cover large contiguous areas for these restoration management permits. So they are a good tool to do much larger scale projects.
Thank you. Mo, there's a question about whether Steelhead was state listed at the time of your project. If so, how your core and Section 7 consultation integrated with the state compliance?
I also went back and checked the dates on that, and they were not listed at the time of the project.
Any thoughts from anybody here about what you would have done if it had been at that time?
I think, and maybe Erica, you can chime in on this if I'm wrong on this, but if we had gone through HREA, then we would have gotten CEQA coverage as well, and that would have included Steelhead for that.
That's right.
All right, I got one right.
Ding, ding, ding. Let's see. Is there, I think that was already answered. Leslie has a question about whether there's any SWIP advice or insights. Maybe, Jim, you look excited to answer that. Go ahead.
Well, and I think Jennifer's also on the line. I mean, SWIP guidance, I think one thing that's really clear if you look at the somewhat new construction general permit, there's been a long-standing tension between what's covered under 401 certification and where 402, which is the other section of the Clean Water Act that the SWIP falls under. I would say look very carefully at the language in the permits. What we have come to understand from the Water Board, and Kellyx and I were involved in sort of helping navigate the construction general permit as it's being renewed, is that you don't need SWIPs technically for areas that are already covered under a 401 cert. One of these we've been doing is working with a lot of our engineers when they provide designs to provide very clear delineation of what is in section 401. So everything else potentially goes to the SWIP consultants. So we've been trying to draw a fine line so we don't end up with SWIP conditions that often are contradictory to 401 and are very hard in dynamic and wetland areas. I don't know if that's the perfect answer, but they shouldn't be overlapping. They should be kind of complementary spatially.
Or
Peter,
more,
I see you
maybe
have
more simply
enthusiastic-
put, it's
Oh.
1 acre of upland disturbance that's a trigger for the NPDES permit.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'll
Thank
just jump in to say, once you've determined exactly what is subject to SWIPs, look and see if you qualify for an erosivity waiver, because that's super easy.
Yeah, and that's for projects with 1 to 5 acres of upland impact. So you've got a couple different stages where you can make some very, very very effective decisions.
A question from Ann Moore-Kill. Hi, Ann. Is really about balancing between wanting to get this early engagement and making effective and efficient use of these agency staff's time. And this is certainly something we've seen as there's been more and more emphasis in recent years on early engagement, whether there's the capacity within the agencies to do that. So how do you do that effectively? I mean, one thing, of course, is, as you mentioned, Peter, is for if it's through the Cutting Green Tape program, there is dedicated staff, perhaps. And that's the case, I know, for things like maybe the Brit and that sort of thing in the Bay Area. But just in general, how do you make the best use of their time so that they can engage effectively?
I know we try very hard to engage regulators at a concept level, right? So to Jim's point, where you have enough sideboards on what your project objectives are, what you want to accomplish, and some general ideas about what might work for you. But before you get so far that it's a cost or a burden on your project to have to go backwards. And so the other thing I wanted to highlight is I do think in the context of restoration coordination that the relationships that you have with regulators is a little bit different. And so providing them an opportunity to participate in how you think about your project, it's actually a lot different than where, a traditional pre-application meeting for a development project where it's more almost adversarial, right? It's really about bringing them into the fold of like what's possible and what's the most efficient use of everybody's time and resources.
I would say there's also onus on all the project proponents to be really thoughtful, have enough information, and have really clear questions. Like you can't just ask people to look at a blank slate and help you. Sometimes you really have to have done enough of your homework, and that's on us to make sure that we're efficiently using people's time.
Yeah, and I just generally find it easier to schedule a call with folks for 30 minutes or an hour than to just send them a deluge of paperwork and expect them to read through it.
I'm going to sort through. So this next question has to do with the Coastal Commission for coastal development permits that for things like beach restoration and coastal resiliency projects that don't have, I'm assuming this, Kim, I assume that your question is about ones that don't have consistency determination. Is anybody familiar with Coastal Commission tools to advance beach restoration and coastal resiliency projects outside of those which have the consistency determinations?
Nothing other than if you're in the retained jurisdiction of the commission, so i.e. you're not in a county or city CDP, you go directly to the commission. And the fact that there's been a lot of discussion over years about developing tools through CGT for the commission, but I don't know of any that have been completed and are viable at this point.
And also, if you're going across multiple jurisdictions, you can go straight to the commission as well. Yeah, Kim, if this didn't answer your question, if you're also wondering about the consistency determinations, go ahead and pop a question back in the chat and we'll know that this wasn't answered and we'll try to circle back to that.
Just to Kim's question, one last thing. If Kim has federal partners, the consistency determination that Kellyx keeps referring to is a federal consistency. So if you have a federal partner on the project, you don't need to use NOAA's programmatic. You theoretically could go through that process, and it's a very simplified process, even for outside of the programmatics. So that's something to consider.
Next question is, do you have in-house expertise to do this work, or do you rely on consultant support? And I'm actually going to amend that to, I think all of you have some in-house expertise. So maybe you can talk about, what sort of things you do in-house, what sort of things, how one might also do it with consultant support. If you could maybe speak to both of those for people.
Yeah, I'll start. I used to do permitting for a consultant, so I have some expertise, but I just don't have time to do that now in my role with the Nature Conservancy. So we hire consultants to do most of the permitting. I'm involved in all the conversations with the agencies and participating in that back and forth. But when it comes to just like actually preparing the forms and shepherding it through the process, we really rely on consultants for that.
How about you, Mo?
Yeah, similarly, we also rely on consultants to help out with a lot of the permitting paperwork. There's a lot of, follow-up emails and coordination. We are part of the process along the way. We do some things on our own sometimes. For example, just doing a simple EPIM submittal, might be something that we can just take on to help. So we try to get involved to be part of the process throughout, the process, and look for help whenever we can. And we should try to build that into our grant funding when we're working on these projects so that we can have those funds available in order to get that work done as efficiently as possible.
I'm not a panelist, but I'm going to jump in with a recommendation on this as well, because I've maybe been around 1 or 2 permits in my life too. And I would say that just for those of you out there who just do not have this in-house capacity, and you're going out to consultants, I would really urge you to still stay involved. Don't think that the consultant is just doing all the work. Make sure you're actually reading what they're producing and looking at it critically, because they're doing their best job of assuming what your needs and priorities and strategies are, but it actually might not be, and you might know more than you think you do, just in terms of how you want to characterize a project, or how you want to prioritize something, or that sort of thing. Just look at it critically, learn from it, keep your conversation going with them, and stay involved in the permitting strategy, even if you're having somebody prepare the documents, and review those documents. We're all cutting and pasting, and nowadays using AI on these things. And so there can be things that are missed. I see a lot of head nodding, so I'm just going to pat myself on the back as that being a good answer. And I'm going to move on to the next one here, which is people are asking, or Laura here is asking, what point in design do you consider early coordination? Specifically, her question is, initial feedback was to come back at 65%, so we have enough info, but it seems like before 35% might be more useful.
Yeah, like I said, we do it at concept, so I would equate that to like 30%. I mean, that's all kind of arbitrary, but it's well before 60%.
Yeah, and Kellyx, you probably answered this as well, but what we often do is we try to get our agency partners involved. We're looking at alternatives as well. So people are sort of bought into the trade-offs of different approaches. So that's even potentially before 30% design. And it's iterative. It's not once. It's just the first entry point.
And it might be different levels of engagement, right? You're checking in about a concept is not the same as asking someone to review something in great detail. It might be different if we're thoughtful about effective use of their time.
And I think it depends on the size of your project as well, your type of project. If you have a fish passage project, your options are somewhat, smaller potentially versus a project like Jim's project, where there might have been a lot of conversations about how far to extend and how big do we make this and how big do we want the reservoir to be, things like that. So
I can offer state water board perspective if you'd like, Kellyx, on this.
Please, thanks, Jessica.
I'd say just general rule of thumb is the 30-60-90 rule. So please come talk to us at 30. At 60, we should be drafting permit or talking about what's actually in the permit, and at 90, we should be looking at, okay, we're ready to approve. So, again, that's a very general rule of thumb, but it's an easy way to think about it. I also, in terms of early engagement, work with my staff about what I call the 3 Ps: what's possible, what's practical, and then what's going in the permit. And so, when you're coming to us in an early engagement, or how soon should we talk to you, just consider that we at the agencies are really interested in what's possible. Anything is possible, but then it's okay, what's practical? So, what did you consider what can you really do? And then, all right, and then we can move into that third P of how can we permit it? So, you know, if you think about those 3 stages, please do engage at those 3 levels, because we're very interested and can give you, you know, guidance to get to the permit as you
Thank
go
you,
along.
Jessica. Thank you. That's really helpful. It's nice to have your actual perspective on this from the water board. I'm going to ask the panelists to go ahead and answer some of these now in writing so we can answer as many questions as possible. But I'm going to take one more. And Kim, I saw that you responded down below, but I'll consider that resolved for now. And then I'm going to ask, Marilyn has a question here, and she's interested. Oh, Peter's typing that. So I'll go to Stu Weiss. Stu wanted to know, did we have opportunities to do field tours with the permitting agencies and staff? And at what point in the process do you think that's optimal? I'm actually going to take a stab at this myself, Stu, while I see Jim typing, which is there are times that a lot of this has depended on whether there's travel restrictions or what's happening budgetarily with the agency staff, whether they can go on field tours. When we can, we try to do that. And we try to bundle sometimes so that they can go to multiple sites in one day and try to make sure that it's relevant to their priorities. I don't know if anybody else has anything to, and you said what point in the process. I think that depends also on what your process is with the integrated watershed restoration program of the Central Coast. We do it early enough that the agency staff can identify their priorities for us to advance to projects. And sometimes it's more when there's trade-offs and we have to work through thorny challenges. So it really has depended on the project and the process. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to field tours and when to do them.
I also just think they're incredibly, it's project specific. I think there are many places where aerial photos and Google Earth are enough. And there are some places where those ways of viewing the site are completely deceiving and really don't provide the nuance and the visceral sort of experience. And that's when really getting people into the field is incredibly important, because whether it's elevation gradients or other sort of unique attributes that you can't pick up from remote sense data, that becomes really important. And when those nuances are going to play into how you're going to design the project.
I am going to Carrie, your question, I'm just going to put about water rights. I'm just going to put my email address in there so you can follow up and we'll talk with you more about how we did that with the Butno project. I'd love to, there's one other question I'd love for us to answer live and then bring Megan back to wrap this up for us. I think, Jim, this is a question for you from Andrew Roth, which is that they keep getting denied for cutting green tape or in other things that are multi-benefit because of the primary restoration clause. So how are we able to get multi-benefit adaptive management projects through cutting green tape?
I'm not sure I have a perfect answer other than our products that are multiple benefits. Most of them, the ecological restoration components are either co-equal goals or clearly hierarchically sort of at the top of the goals. So they're not projects doing other stuff as the main goal and then kind of adding some restoration. And a lot of that has to do with how you are approaching your project. So I don't think there's an easy answer to where the line is drawn. For us, it's the straight face test. If we really believe that restoration is the driving feature behind the project, but it's got tons of other benefits, then we're going to write a narrative that explains that, and we're going to kind of advocate for that. If we don't feel that way, we look in the mirror and we decide we're not going to go in these CGT routes. So it's a little bit more art than science, I would say.
I want to thank the 113 of you who stuck it out this far. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Jessica Nadolski, who came from the State Water Board, who really wrote the general order that you are familiar with or was very deeply involved from her agency. So thanks for answering that question. And Deputy Secretary Hertel, I'd love to invite you back to send us on our way.
Wow, what an incredible webinar and an incredible set of speakers. I learned so much, and it's really inspiring to see how each of you have taken the variety of cutting the green tape tools that are out there to help make sure we're doing some of the best restoration as quickly and efficiently as possible. So just a reminder to folks that this webinar is recorded and will be posted both on the California 30 by 30 website as well as Sustainable Conservation's Accelerating Restoration website, Kellyx. A real debt of gratitude to you and all the people who have been organizing these series. Please join us again on May 21st to hear more. Keep the questions coming. They help inform our future content, both in webinar and written format. So with that, I will just say thanks, everyone. Keep up the great work, and we will talk to you all soon.